Echoes of the Ancient Throne. For Julian Park, the universe had always been a puzzle waiting to be solved. His fascination with forgotten places and lost histories had led him to some of the most obscure corners of the galaxy. But nothing had prepared him for this, a massive ancient chamber hidden beneath the surface of an uncharted planet, orbiting a dying blue star. The entrance had been unassuming, a jagged fissure in the planet's rocky terrain. Julian had stumbled upon it during one of his exploratory treks, his handheld scanner picking up faint energy signals that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. With a mix of hesitation and excitement, he had descended into the depths, his boots crunching on ancient stone steps. Each step seemed to echo, as if the very walls were whispering their discontent at his presence. When he finally emerged into the chamber, he was struck by its sheer size. Towering pillars, etched with alien hieroglyphs, stretched toward a vaulted ceiling so high it disappeared into shadows. The air was thick, carrying a metallic tang that made each breath feel heavy. But at the center of it all was the throne, a monstrous construct of sharp spines and dark, gleaming scales, glowing faintly with blue luminescence. Julian's first thought was that it looked alive. The lure of the unseen. The throne was unlike anything Julian had ever read about in his studies. It wasn't just a relic. It was a masterpiece of alien craftsmanship, both terrifying and beautiful. The sharp spines radiating outward gave it the appearance of a dormant predator, ready to strike. The veins of blue light running through its surface pulsed faintly, as if responding to his presence. This is incredible," Julian whispered, his voice swallowed by the chamber's oppressive silence. He fumbled for his datapad, fingers trembling as he tried to capture every detail. This wasn't just a discovery. It was the kind of thing that could make his career, maybe even his life. He approached cautiously, each step deliberate. His scanner buzzed faintly, its readings fluctuating wildly. He couldn't decipher what the signals meant, but he didn't care. This was what he lived for, the thrill of the unknown, the chance to uncover something no one else had ever seen. A chair that waited too long. Julian stopped a few feet away from the throne, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and curiosity. The structure seemed to hum faintly, a low vibration that he felt more than heard. It was as if the throne was waiting, watching. He hesitated. The myths he had read about the Ezran Dominion, an ancient and powerful alien civilization, had always fascinated him. Their artifacts were said to hold incredible power, but also great danger. One legend, in particular, stood out in his mind. A story about a throne that was cursed, meant only for the rulers of the Ezran. To sit unbidden is to awaken the wrath, Julian muttered, recalling the words. But then he shook his head. Myths were just that, myths. The Ezran had vanished thousands of years ago. There was no one left to claim the throne. Besides, he said, forcing a grin, it's just a chair. The first touch. Driven by a mix of bravado and curiosity, Julian reached out, his hand hovering inches above the throne's armrest. The surface seemed to shift slightly, the blue veins flaring brighter as if in anticipation. He hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment, the kind of moment he had dreamed about since he was a kid. A story for the ages. The story. He let his hand drop. The instant his fingers touched the throne, the chamber came alive. The hum turned into a deep, resonating roar, shaking the ground beneath his feet. The blue veins on the throne surged with light, racing up its spines like lightning. Julian staggered back, his hand instinctively clutching his datapad. "What the?" he exclaimed, but his words were drowned out by the sound of stone grinding against stone. The massive door he had entered through began to close, ancient mechanisms groaning as they sealed him inside. Panic set in. He turned and ran toward the door, but it was too late. The final echo of the stone slamming shut reverberated through the chamber, leaving him trapped. The awakening. Julian spun around, his eyes darting back to the throne. It was no longer dormant. The spines rattled like blades unsheathing, and the air crackled with energy. The blue light that had pulsed faintly before now blazed, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The entire room seemed to tremble, as if the throne's awakening had disturbed something much larger. "I didn't sign up for this," Julian muttered, backing away. But his retreat was cut short when the floor beneath him shifted, glowing lines of energy snaking outward from the throne. They formed intricate patterns, lighting up the chamber in a dazzling display. Then he heard it, a voice, deep and resonant, speaking a language he couldn't understand. The words echoed in his mind, sending a chill down his spine. A price to pay. Who dares disturb the throne of the High Worm? Julian froze. The voice wasn't just in his head. It was everywhere, reverberating through the chamber like a living presence. He wanted to answer, to explain, but his throat was dry, and no words came. The throne seemed to shift again, its spines flexing like the claws of a great beast. The glowing veins pulsed faster, as if alive with anger. Julian could only watch in stunned silence as the room grew brighter and brighter, the patterns on the floor converging into a single point of light. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. Julian was left standing in the silence once more, the light fading until only the faint blue glow of the throne remained. But the air was different now, heavier, charged with something he couldn't define. Something had changed, and Julian had the sinking feeling that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The throne's judgment. The silence that followed was suffocating. Julian stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat, as the chamber seemed to hold its collective breath. The glow of the throne dimmed, pulsing faintly like the dying embers of a fire. But the air around it had changed. It wasn't just heavy anymore. It was alive, buzzing with an energy that seemed to press against his skin. He tried to back away, but his legs wouldn't move. The intricate patterns that had lit up the floor moments ago still glowed faintly, their sharp angles and alien curves forming a shape that reminded him of a great beast coiled and ready to strike. "All right," Julian whispered to himself, his voice trembling. "This is fine. Totally fine. It's just a really angry chair." A voice from the void. Before he could gather his thoughts, the voice returned. It was deep, resonant, and impossibly ancient, vibrating through his very bones. This time, it spoke in a language he could understand, a harsh, guttural tongue that seemed to scrape against the edges of his mind. "You are unworthy, yet you awaken me. Explain yourself." Julian swallowed hard. His mouth was dry, his heart pounding like a drum. I'm just a tourist," he stammered, raising his hands as if that might somehow appease the unseen presence. "I didn't mean to wake you up, or whatever this is. I was just curious." The chamber rumbled in response, the sound like distant thunder. The patterns on the floor shifted, the glowing lines snaking toward the throne as though feeding it energy. Julian's eyes darted between the movement on the ground and the throne itself, which now seemed to pulse in time with the patterns. "Curiosity, the flaw of your kind. You stumble blindly into the domain of gods." The High Worm's legacy. Julian's mind raced. The voice wasn't just angry. It was calculating, probing, as though it was peeling back the layers of his thoughts. He felt exposed, vulnerable, like a child caught breaking something he couldn't possibly fix. "Look," he said, forcing himself to take a step forward despite every instinct screaming at him to run. "I didn't know. Okay. I didn't know this was some kind of sacred throne or whatever. I'm just a historian, or, well, a grad student, really. I study stuff like this." The voice chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent chills down Julian's spine. "You claim to seek knowledge, yet you come without reverence. Do you even know what this place is? What I am?" Julian hesitated, the words catching in his throat. He thought back to the fragmented records he had skimmed before his trip, the tales of the Ezran Dominion and their mighty rulers. "You're the High Worm's throne," he said finally. the seat of power for the Ezran dominion. A throne is a tool, a vessel. I am far more than that. The light in the room flared again, blinding him for a moment. When his vision cleared, the throne's shape had changed. It was still massive, still menacing, but now it seemed more alive. The spines curled inward like claws, and the blue veins pulsed with a rhythm that felt disturbingly like a heartbeat. The burden of the crown. For 2,736 cycles, I have waited. The high worm is gone, and with it, the dominion crumbled. Yet you, a mere human, dare to sit where only gods have tread. Julian's stomach dropped. I didn't sit on purpose, he blurted out, waving his arms defensively. It was, an accident. Honest. The chamber rumbled again, the patterns on the floor glowing brighter. The energy in the room shifted, growing heavier, more oppressive. Julian felt like he was standing at the edge of a storm, the air crackling with anticipation. You have awoken the throne, and now you must bear the consequences. What consequences? Julian asked, his voice rising in panic. I'm not a ruler. I don't even know how to lead a trivia team, let alone an empire. The voice ignored his protest. The throne does not care for your ignorance. It has chosen you, and the choice cannot be undone. The throne's challenge. Before Julian could respond, the glowing patterns on the floor erupted in a cascade of light, forming a swirling vortex of energy that surrounded the throne. The air crackled with electricity, and Julian felt his hair stand on end. Prove yourself worthy, or perish as the others before you. Wait, what others? Julian shouted, but his words were drowned out by the roar of the energy vortex. He stumbled backward, shielding his face as the light grew brighter and brighter. Then, without warning, the light vanished. Julian lowered his arms cautiously, his eyes adjusting to the sudden darkness. The throne was still there, its blue veins glowing faintly. But now, standing in front of it, was a figure, a towering reptilian creature with scales as black as obsidian and eyes that burned like molten gold. It stepped forward, each movement deliberate, its claws clicking against the stone floor. Face me, human, and prove your worth. Julian's jaw dropped. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. The duel begins. The creature didn't wait for him to respond. With a roar that shook the chamber, it lunged toward him, its claws slashing through the air. Julian barely had time to dive out of the way, the ground where he had been standing moments ago erupting in a shower of sparks. I'm not a fighter, Julian shouted, scrambling to his feet. I'm just a nerd with a backpack. But the creature didn't care. It advanced again, its movements swift and deadly. Julian darted behind one of the massive pillars, his mind racing. There had to be a way out of this, some trick, some strategy. Then he remembered the stories. The throne was said to test those who dared to claim it, pushing them to their limits to prove their worth. Maybe this wasn't about fighting at all. Maybe it was about something else. Taking a deep breath, Julian stepped out from behind the pillar, his heart pounding. All right, he said, raising his hands. Let's see what you've got. The human gambit. Julian's pulse raced as the towering creature circled him, its molten gold eyes fixed on him with predatory intensity. Its scales shimmered with an eerie light that matched the faint glow of the throne behind it. Each of its movements radiated power, its claws glinting like razors in the dim chamber. He had no weapons, no armor, and absolutely no plan. Yet somehow he was still standing. All right, Julian, he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the creature's low growl. You've gotten out of scrapes before. Granted, they usually involved bad grades or awkward dates, not, a giant murder lizard. But you've got this. Probably. The beast's first strike. Without warning, the creature lunged again, faster this time. Julian threw himself sideways, skidding across the stone floor as the beast's claws slashed through the air where he'd just been standing. Sparks erupted as its talons raked across the floor, leaving deep gouges in the ancient stone. "Could we maybe talk this out?" Julian shouted, scrambling to his feet. The creature responded with a roar, a sound so loud and primal it felt like the air itself vibrated. "I'll take that as a no," he muttered, backing away. The chamber felt smaller now, the towering pillars closing in as the beast advanced. Julian's mind raced. He needed to think. He needed to survive. A spark of insight. As the creature moved closer, something caught Julian's eye. A faint pattern etched into the stone pillar beside him. It was similar to the glowing lines on the floor, but these carvings seemed more intricate, almost like circuitry. He traced them with his fingers, feeling a faint warmth beneath his touch. The throne's voice echoed in his mind once more, deep and resonant. The throne tests not strength alone, but the fire of the mind and the courage of the heart. Prove you possess both, or fall. Julian blinked. Fire of the mind. Is this some kind of puzzle? The creature roared again, snapping him back to the present. It lunged forward, its claws slashing through the air. Julian ducked behind the pillar, heart pounding, as the beast's talons carved into the stone with a deafening crack. Okay, Julian muttered, darting to the next pillar. Think, Julian, think. The riddle of the throne. The glowing patterns on the floor and the pillars weren't random. Julian could see that now. They formed a sequence, a repeating rhythm that seemed to pulse in time with the faint hum of the throne. If he could figure out the sequence, maybe, just maybe, he could stop the creature. He glanced back at the beast, which was prowling toward him, its molten eyes narrowing. He had seconds, at best. Taking a deep breath, Julian began to move, tracing the glowing patterns on the floor with his footsteps. The lines flared brighter beneath his feet, their energy rippling outward toward the throne. Encouraged, he quickened his pace, moving from one glowing section to the next. The creature hesitated, its head tilting as if it, too, could feel the shift in the room's energy. It let out a guttural growl, then charged. A desperate gamble. Julian reached the final glowing section, just as the beast closed in. Without thinking, he dropped to his knees, slamming his hands onto the glowing lines. The patterns blazed to life, a surge of energy racing through the chamber like a shockwave. The beast froze mid-lunge, its body trembling as the light enveloped it. For a moment, Julian thought he'd won. But then the creature let out an ear-splitting roar, its form twisting and contorting. The light around it dimmed, and Julian realized with horror that it wasn't being stopped, it was being strengthened. The throne's voice boomed again, harsh and unforgiving. A test of the mind requires patience. You seek shortcuts, human. That will be your undoing. Patience, Julian shouted, scrambling to his feet. I'm kind of short on time here, okay. The creature lunged again, its movements more fluid, more dangerous than before. Julian barely dodged, his body hitting the stone floor hard. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he forced himself to move, crawling toward the nearest pillar. The path to victory. As he crouched behind the pillar, Julian's mind raced. He couldn't brute force his way through this. The throne was right. This wasn't about raw power. It was about solving the puzzle. But how? He glanced at the glowing lines on the pillar and then at the patterns on the floor. They were connected, forming a larger sequence that spiraled outward from the throne itself. If he could align them, complete the circuit, maybe he could end this. The beast prowled closer, its molten eyes locked onto him. Julian took a deep breath. All right, he muttered. No pressure or anything. He darted out from behind the pillar, moving toward the next section of glowing patterns. The creature roared, giving chase, but Julian didn't stop. He followed the sequence, his footsteps precise, his hands tracing the lines as he went. The energy in the room grew stronger with each step, the patterns glowing brighter. The beast lunged again, but this time Julian was ready. He dived forward, rolling across the floor and slamming his hand onto the final glowing section. The room erupted in light. The beast subdued. The creature let out a final, anguished roar as the energy engulfed it. Its form flickered, then dissolved into a cascade of sparks. Julian collapsed to the ground, his chest heaving, as the chamber fell silent once more. The throne's voice echoed in his mind, quieter this time. "You have proven your resolve, human. But this is only the beginning." Julian groaned, pushing himself to his feet. "Of course it is," he muttered, "because why would it ever be easy?" The patterns on the floor faded, leaving the chamber dim and still. But the throne still pulsed faintly, its blue veins glowing like the embers of a fire waiting to be reignited. Julian stared at it, a mix of exhaustion and determination in his eyes. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but one thing was certain: he wasn't leaving this chamber the same person who had entered it. The throne's choice. The chamber was eerily silent, the kind of silence that seemed alive. Julian leaned against one of the towering pillars, his breathing ragged, his body aching from the ordeal. The glowing veins on the throne pulsed faintly, a rhythmic beat that felt almost like a heartbeat. He could feel it, deep in his chest, as if the throne's energy had entwined with his own. He wiped the sweat from his brow and muttered to himself, "This is the worst vacation ever." But deep down, he knew it wasn't over. The throne hadn't finished with him yet. The whispering walls. The silence was broken by a sound, a faint whisper, like the rustling of leaves. Julian froze, his eyes scanning the chamber. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, an ancient language that he couldn't quite understand but felt in his bones. "The throne waits. The choice is yours." The words weren't just in his head. They resonated through the very stone of the chamber. Julian swallowed hard, stepping closer to the throne despite every instinct screaming at him to run. "Choice," he said aloud, his voice echoing. "What choice? I didn't sign up for this. I was just." Silence. "You trespass. You awaken. Now you choose." The throne's veins pulsed brighter, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Julian stared at it, his heart pounding. The throne seemed to loom larger, its spines curling inward like the claws of a great beast preparing to strike. A test of will. Julian clenched his fists, his fear slowly giving way to frustration. "You keep talking about tests and choices, but maybe you should explain what's actually going on here." The chamber rumbled, a low, ominous sound that made the ground tremble beneath his feet. The glowing patterns on the floor began to shift again, forming new shapes, spirals, lines, and symbols that seemed to tell a story. As Julian watched, he realized the symbols were depicting him. His arrival, his touch on the throne, the beast he had faced. It was as if the chamber itself was documenting his every move. "Great," he muttered. "Now I'm part of some cosmic scrapbook." The symbols changed again, this time forming two distinct paths. One spiraled outward, its lines sharp and jagged, leading toward what looked like destruction. The other curved inward, smooth and flowing, leading back to the throne. One path binds you to the throne's power, the other leaves you broken. Julian blinked, the weight of the choice sinking in. "You're saying I can leave, but I won't survive." To awaken the throne is to accept its burden. To refuse is to be unmade. The bond of fire. Julian's mind raced. The throne wasn't just a seat of power, it was alive, a relic imbued with the will of an ancient civilization. To sit on it was to inherit its legacy and its curse. He thought of the stories he had read, the legends of the Ezran Dominion. Their rulers weren't just leaders. They were warriors, guardians, and prisoners of the throne's power. "Why me?" Julian whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm not a ruler. I'm not a fighter. I'm just me." The chamber didn't answer, but the glowing veins of the throne pulsed steadily, as if in response to his doubt. Slowly, the whispering grew louder, words swirling around him like a storm. "The throne does not choose the strongest. It chooses the one who will endure." Julian closed his eyes, the weight of those words pressing down on him. Endurance. That was something he understood. He'd faced failure, rejection, and setbacks all his life, yet he'd kept going. Maybe that was what the throne had seen in him. The final step. He opened his eyes and took a deep breath. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "If this is what it takes, then let's do this." He approached the throne, his footsteps echoing in the chamber. The air grew heavier with each step, the glowing veins flaring brighter. When he reached it, he hesitated, his hand hovering above the armrest. "Once chosen, there is no return." "I figured," Julian muttered. "But hey, it's not like I have a lot of options, do I?" With that, he lowered himself onto the throne. The moment his body touched its surface, the chamber erupted in light. The glowing patterns on the floor and walls blazed, the energy coursing through the room like a living thing. Julian gritted his teeth as the power of the throne surged through him. It wasn't just a physical sensation. It was mental, emotional, like a torrent of memories and knowledge flooding his mind. He saw visions of the Ezran rulers, their triumphs and tragedies, their sacrifices and burdens. He felt their strength and their pain. The awakening. The light dimmed, leaving the chamber bathed in a soft blue glow. Julian sat motionless on the throne, his hands gripping the armrests. The energy coursing through him had settled, but he could feel its presence, a constant hum beneath his skin. "You are bound to the throne. You are its guardian, its voice, its will." The words echoed in his mind, but this time they felt different. They weren't a command. They were a part of him now. Julian took a deep breath and opened his eyes. The chamber was still, the glowing patterns fading into the stone once more. But he knew the journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. For better or worse, he was the throne's chosen, and the galaxy would never be the same. The throne's secret. Julian sat motionless on the throne, his body heavy with exhaustion and his mind a tempest of foreign sensations. The glow of the veins beneath his hands pulsed softly, sensing with his own heartbeat. He wasn't sure where he ended and the throne began anymore. It felt as though they were one, an unsettling bond forged by forces he didn't fully understand. The chamber was silent, but not empty. He could feel it now, layers of unseen presence, like echoes of the past pressing against the edges of his consciousness. Each one was a fragment of something ancient, something vast. The throne awakens its keeper, but the keeper awakens the throne. Julian jumped at the voice. It was different this time. Softer, calmer. Less like a command and more like a conversation. Who are you?" he stammered. "I am not a who. I am what remains. A fragment of the Ezran High Worm's will. The Guardian's burden." Julian blinked, his thoughts racing. "So you're like an AI or a ghost?" The voice didn't answer immediately. When it did, there was a hint of amusement in its tone. A fragment of knowledge, a whisper of purpose. "Call me what you wish, human. But understand this. The throne is not just a seat of power. It is a bond, a promise, and a burden." Julian rubbed his temples, feeling a headache forming. "Great. So I'm married to a chair. That's just fantastic. You mock what you cannot yet comprehend. This bond is what saved civilizations and destroyed them in equal measure. You are not chosen for greatness. You are chosen because you are possible." Julian frowned. Possible? What does that even mean? It means your path is unwritten, and the galaxy's survival may hinge on that. The vault of shadows. The throne began to hum softly, its energy resonating with the patterns on the floor. Julian watched in awe as the chamber shifted around him. Walls that had once been solid stone now moved, revealing a hidden passage that spiraled downward into darkness. The throne guards more than memories. It guards the heart of the Ezran Dominion's power. You must understand it, protect it, and if necessary, destroy it. Julian stood, his legs shaky but determined. Destroy it? Why would I need to destroy it? Because the power that built empires is the same power that unraveled them. In the wrong hands, it could do so again. The weight of those words settled heavily on Julian's shoulders. He didn't want this responsibility. He hadn't asked for it. But here he was, standing at the threshold of something much larger than himself. Descent into the unknown. With a deep breath, Julian stepped toward the newly revealed passage. The air grew colder as he descended, the dim glow of the throne fading behind him. The steps were steep, the walls narrowing, as though the passage itself were trying to squeeze him out. But he pressed on, the faint hum of energy guiding his steps. As he reached the bottom, the passage opened into another chamber, smaller, but no less imposing. At its center stood a pedestal, and atop it, a crystalline orb that shimmered with shifting colors. The air around it seemed to vibrate, distorting reality itself. Julian hesitated, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. This was it, the heart of the Esrin's power. The thing he was now bound to protect. The shard of dominion. The voice said, reverent and cautious. It is the essence of the Esrin's rule, their greatest achievement, and their greatest mistake. The truth of the Esrin. Julian approached the pedestal slowly, his eyes locked on the orb. Mistake. What do you mean? The shard gave the Esrin the power to unite galaxies, but it also consumed them. It amplified their ambitions, their fears, their greed. In the end, it turned their strength into their downfall. Julian reached out, his fingers hovering inches from the orb. He could feel its energy, a strange mix of warmth and cold that sent shivers up his arm. So, why keep it? Why not destroy it? Because it is more than destruction. It is possibility. The shard reflects its bearer. In your hands, it could bring hope or devastation. The words sent a chill down Julian's spine. He pulled his hand back, suddenly unsure. I'm not qualified for this. I'm just some guy who likes exploring weird places. That is why you were chosen. The throne sees not what you are, but what you can become. A warning from the past. The chamber began to tremble, faint at first, but growing stronger. Julian stumbled back, his heart racing. What's happening? The shard senses what approaches. You must decide quickly. Protect it, or unleash it. Julian's mind raced. Protect it from what? What was coming? But there was no time for answers. The tremors grew more violent, cracks forming in the walls as the chamber seemed to tear itself apart. He grabbed the shard, its energy surging through him like a tidal wave. Visions flooded his mind. Of the Esrin dominion at its height, of its collapse, of wars fought over the shard's power. He saw himself standing at the center of it all, a choice looming before him. And then the visions were gone. The shard pulsed faintly in his hands, its energy now calm. You are its keeper now. The galaxy will come for it. And for you. A keeper's resolve. Julian tightened his grip on the shard, his jaw set with determination. Let them come, he said, more to himself than to the voice. I didn't ask for this, but I'm not letting anyone else turn this thing into a weapon. The chamber's tremors subsided, leaving an uneasy stillness. Julian turned and began the long climb back to the throne room, the shard's faint glow lighting his path. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain, he couldn't run from this. For better or worse, he was now the keeper of the shard, and his decisions would shape the fate of more than just himself. The slender figure hesitated, its gaze flicking between Julian and the throne. He's bonded to it, core. This complicates matters. Silence. The tallest figure snapped. Bond or not, he is unworthy. Finish him. The throne's intervention. Before the attackers could move, the throne itself responded. Its glowing veins surged with light, the spines curling inward like claws. A deep hum filled the chamber, a sound that resonated in Julian's chest. The throne's voice echoed, powerful and commanding. You challenge the keeper. You challenge the throne. You challenge the Esrin's legacy. Leave now, or be consumed. The intruders hesitated. Even the tallest figure seemed uncertain, its shield faltering as the throne's energy pressed against it. The room grew colder, the air crackling with tension. Julian took a step forward, his confidence growing. "You heard the chair," he said, his voice firm. "This shard isn't yours anymore, so maybe take your ominous threats and get lost." The tallest figure snarled but backed away, its form flickering like a dying flame. "This is not over, Keeper. The void does not forget." With that, the three figures vanished, their forms dissolving into shadows. The chamber fell silent once more. A moment of clarity. Julian collapsed to his knees, the shard still glowing faintly in his hand. His body ached, and his mind felt like it had run a marathon. But he was alive. Somehow, against all odds, he had survived. The throne's voice returned, softer this time. "You have faced the first of many. The void will come again, as will others. Your path is not an easy one, Keeper." Julian let out a shaky laugh. "Yeah, I kind of figured that out already." He looked down at the shard, its glow now calm and steady. "But I'm not giving up," he said, his voice resolute. "If this is my responsibility now, then I'll protect it, no matter what." The throne's veins pulsed faintly, as if in approval. Julian stood, his resolve stronger than ever. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was ready to face it. For the first time, he felt like he belonged, not just to the shard, but to the legacy it carried. And he knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning.